Welcome to a special edition of the Daily Download. It is election season. The balance of power in our state's General Assembly is on the ballot this year. These are the folks who set tax rates, they decide how much funding schools receive, and next year they might have something new to say about abortion restrictions. So today we've got a little mini debate for you. I'm Travis Fain, I cover government for WRAL, and I'm joined by two state lawmakers, one Republican, one Democrat, and they're going to make their cases for why Republicans should or should not have a supermajority coming out of this election. So say hello to Republican State Representative Jason Sain of Lincoln County.
Hello, Travis. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being here. And Representative Marcia Morey, a Democrat from Durham County.
I am. Nice to be here, Travis. Thank you. Thank you, Representative Sain.
And thank you.
First things first. So what is a supermajority? That's when one party wins enough legislative seats to overturn the governor's veto. Right now, Republicans have a regular majority. They can pass what they want in the legislature, but Governor Cooper, a Democrat, he can veto it. And without a supermajority, Republicans have never been able to overturn one of his vetoes. This, Cooper would argue, keeps bad ideas off the table. But if Republicans pick up 5 seats in the elections that are now underway, they can overcome those vetoes without any help from Democrats. It's going to come down to a handful of swing districts around the state. And if you're listening to this in Wake County, you might be in one of these. So, Representative Sain, we're going to start with you. Lay out your case briefly. Why should people vote Republican? Why should we give Republicans a supermajority?
Well, part of it is the quality of candidates that we've recruited this time. I think we've got folks in districts that are running in some of these competitive districts that we're talking about where we've recruited some really good quality candidates. And so part of that is the reason. I mean, and part of it is philosophy. We've gone through 10 years of really good economic times in our state, in large part due to the tax reform and the management that we've had from the Republicans in the House and Senate, and things have gone very well. There's been some other bumps in the road with COVID and the fact that we couldn't get some of the legislation through, that the governor kept vetoing on openings of things like gyms and other institutions that as we were trying to move through that. So it was complicated, and I get that. And there was certainly opinions on both sides. But I do believe that as voters go to the polls, that they need to look at the record that we have in the state over these last 10 years and look at the Republican ticket. And I think when they do, that gives you a supermajority because we've just done so well in recruiting and really being very tactical in making sure that we have folks that relate to the people in their districts.
And I should say, so the last 10 years, it has been started with Governor McCrory and a Republican legislature, so they could do what they wanted. And then Governor Cooper got elected, but you still had the supermajority, so you could do what you wanted. And then in 2018, Democrats broke the supermajority. So we've been under this kind of divided control of government since 2018, so about 4 years. Representative Morey, there's essentially no chance Democrats can win their own majority in these elections. So make your argument for the status quo here for divided government, Democrats able to sustain Governor Cooper's vetoes.
Thanks. Well, divided government calls for conversation. It calls for compromise. It calls for ideas from both sides of the aisle to come forward. And I think what's important for people to understand what a majority means. I mean, how much power goes just simply with a majority. That the speaker determines who's on which committees, when bills will be heard, what bills will be heard. I've filed 10 bills about gun safety. Not one of them has gotten a hearing. And so, you need to understand that having the majority is extremely powerful. Having a supermajority almost negates a party. So I think the balance we have, divided government, I think is good. I wish we did have more say. I came in when we were in a superminority, and then we broke that. But I think the governor's veto has been good to stop some bad bills. We haven't been able to push a good agenda that I think public opinion has behind us. So I'm looking forward to someday the Democrats will take a majority because I do think we're on the right side of a lot of the issues the public agrees on, and a better balance in things that we're hearing in passing.
Representative, you can respond to that as you see fit, but also hit this idea for me. We've had a really strong run of economic successes lately. Isn't some of that due to the shared governments we got here? If Republicans controlled things, had the power to pass, whatever social issue bills, be it abortion, be it LGBTQ issues, would Apple still be coming here? Is the Cooper administration's friendly stance toward electric vehicles not part of the reason we're becoming a hub for that industry. You got Toyota, VinFast, Wolfspeed, all kind of connected in that area. So economically, how much of the credit do you give to Republican tax policies? Y'all have cut taxes significantly over the last decade versus the moderating impact of divided government.
I think varying opinions matter, certainly, and having input. Just because someone wears the Republican label or the Democrat label, I don't assume that they agree with me or disagree with me. A lot of the bills that I run, I usually try to go recruit members of the other party so that we can get buy-in and get input and get these things passed, whether they're in the minority or whether in a higher minority or a lower minority or whatever. I do try to build consensus on a lot of the bills that I run. When we look at the budget, we try to build consensus and get buy-in. Certainly with not having a supermajority, we do that because we don't want the budget vetoed. But even before that, when you look when I was finance chair, we had a record vote on our budget when we had a supermajority. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the other party doesn't have a say-so. I think it comes down to the individual legislator, how well they work with others, how well they push forward their ideas. But I also think that. But you talk about the economic success. Look, I'm an electric car guy. I rode in the Rivian before the governor did, and as a matter of fact, sponsored the legislation that brought Tesla into the state. And EV vehicles are happening in our traditional manufacturers. If you think Ford, Chevy, and so forth, I mean they're really pushing it. So I think part of that's just happening. We just happen to have the right business climate to recruit those type of businesses here. We've got a workforce that we've helped develop over the last decade. They see that and they want to come to the state. I think it's a victory for all of us. I absolutely do. But I don't know that that's necessarily because the governor's been able to enjoy, as I always say, I'm glad to have him cut ribbons for new business to come here because he's the figurehead. He should, and his commerce department's part of the recruitment. But we've given them a lot of tools to work with, and part of that's a really great economy to do so.
Yeah, but how much does taking a restrictive abortion bill off the table because of the veto threat, how much does No House Bill 2, the infamous bathroom bill that caused such a backlash, whether you think that backlash is fair or not, doesn't that impact economic growth?
Well, during that whole time, we were still growing. So I don't know how much. I mean, it certainly matters to some companies more than others. Some are more politically active than others. It was certainly a topic for 2 years. We know that. And we ended up at a form of compromise. Where we came out at the end of it, most of us are still not really sure. It was a weird time for sure. But I don't know that that's necessarily the case. You see states like Florida, states like Texas who are doing very well, more kind of uniparty rule. So I think it's more of matching up with the citizens of the state. And if that's where the citizens of the state have moved, then I think, in terms of representative democracy, that's what it looks like.
All right, Representative Moray, weigh in on that. How much, if we had a Republican supermajority the last 4 years, is Apple coming here? Or these other companies, these big companies coming here? I mean, I will say, we're the number one state for business right now, according to, I believe, CNBC. A lot of that has to do with Republican tax policy. But we got a heck of a good quality of life here. Does that kind of just overcome it all?
Well, and I think businesses are concerned about what are our social values. What are we doing about, LGBT rights? What are we doing about funding our public schools? I mean, we have a lot of revenue. But we had a budget that wasn't debated in an open committee. It was a conference budget. That power concentrated in a majority without dialogue with the minority, I don't think that serves the state the best way it can.
Yeah, just to be clear, that last budget moved through a process where it didn't have to go through each committee and get the amount of. I will say, Representative Sain, earlier when you said that y'all try to get bipartisanship on. I think TRI might be doing a lot of work there. I'll let Representative Morris weigh in on that.
Well, I do think we felt left out of the budget process. That there were no amendments allowed. It came to the floor. It's up or down. But I agree our economy's good, but I also think we're failing to do what we need to do for so many of the people, the working class, the people that are getting less than a minimum wage, and they're working 3 jobs. Our public schools, we're coming into a constitutional crisis. If our courts say we must fund the Leandro plan and the General Assembly refuses to, where are we going? I'm really concerned about, the public schools and our educators getting what they deserve and watching these test scores fall. We have to do a lot more.
Yeah, and the Leandro plan, just for folks who don't know, is a long-running court case where the courts may order the state legislature to drastically increase education funding by hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars over the next few years. And then I don't know what happens, because I don't know that we've ever seen the state Supreme Court order the legislature to pass a bigger budget. We're going to take a quick break right here, and then we're going to come back. We're going to talk a little bit more. All right, y'all, welcome back. We got one Republican, one Democrat, both well-respected lawmakers at the state legislature talking about whether or not Republicans should win a supermajority and really take the reins of policy writing in state government, even more so than they have now, because they could overturn Governor Roy Cooper, Democrats' vetoes. Representative Sain, Republican, what will your party do on abortion if y'all get a supermajority?
I think that answer is yet to be found out. We got to see who makes it to the legislature for sure, right? Varying opinions within my own caucus about what needs to happen. As we were watching the case as it was going through, there were heated opinions in the room, like I say, within the caucus room. Caucus is, just the Republicans when we meet and have our meeting outside of the legislative body. As we were discussing, you had folks that wanted to do a lot more by limiting abortion, and you had folks who wanted to leave things kind of status quo with the law that's on the book.
Status quo is at 20 weeks.
20 weeks.
20. You can't get abortion without a medical emergency after 20 weeks in North Carolina, not legally at least.
Right, and so that's there and it's in place. And for some in my caucus, that limitation was fine. They were okay leaving it at that. So I don't know that we have that answer yet, what that will look like, because it really depends on who gets elected, and it depends on their opinions. And when you look at the Republicans that are on those, kind of what I call purple seats, those toss-up seats, they're generally from more urban districts, more suburban to urban districts. They're a bit more moderated in their viewpoints, and then you'll see whatever the Democratic minority looks like. And so again, you've got to cobble together the votes there too. So I don't know that the assumption, and I've heard this on some of the talk radio shows and so forth, and some of the prognosticators. I don't know that necessarily moves the needle much further to the right, or if it is more looks like the status quo because of who those new Republicans will be that make up that supermajority.
Sure, but I mean, fair to say leadership is primarily from more conservative districts. I know the Speaker of the House is Tim Moore. He's expressed interest in a heartbeat bill, which is I think 6 weeks in that area. Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger, the number one Republican in the Senate, he said maybe around 12 weeks, although he hasn't fully committed to that. There is a bill at the national level that has a lot of Republican backing at 15 weeks. I mean, don't voters need to know what the policy? I mean, before they vote for y'all.
Well, I think that's right, but voters aren't voting for the entire legislative body. I think it goes into, like I say, those districts where it is going to be close, and so and those questions are being asked of those that are running that have opponents in those really close races. So I think, like I say, I think it comes back to the legislature and it comes back to how that debate plays out, and we're really just not sure until we know what the makeup of the body is. But if that's an issue that's important to you, and you're watching, the contests that are in those toss-up districts, and you might live in one. Certainly in this listening area where we're sitting, you might be making that choice. So I think it's incumbent upon the voter to ask that candidate where do they stand on that issue, because I think it will be critical if that's an important issue to you. Then that's something you need to know and ask of your legislator.
And there will be significant pressure from Republican groups, important Republican constituencies, to go further than the state has now. Representative Morey, do you feel like this moderating impact on abortion would win out the day even under a Republican supermajority, or do you think there's going to be too much pressure to go further?
Oh, I think we're worried that it will go further. Before the session adjourned last time, I was the sponsor of a bill, Codify Roe versus Wade. It's what the country knew. It was 50 years of law, and let's keep it the same. But I think anytime we hear Republicans debate, should it be 6 weeks, should it be 12 weeks, should it be 20 weeks, we're inserting ourselves into a woman's private health care decision. And I think that's dangerous. And there probably is some disagreement among Democrats in the caucus about how the language would look, but I think we look at it more of a woman's right to privacy and right to have her own health decision.
Poll numbers, though, show pretty good support at 20 weeks. I mean, I think it's in the neighborhood of 60%. I mean, you're never going to – that is such a divisive issue. But, I mean, what's the argument against leaving where it is? Well, why would Democrats want to undo some of that?
Well, I think they want to adhere to what the Constitution was interpreted by the justices for 50 years in Roe versus Wade. We have chaos across this country now with 50 states, 50 individual laws, women coming across borders, trying to find appointments. I mean, it's a mess right now. But I think the moderate view of Democrats is we should not be involved in these healthcare decisions.
Talk to me about guns a little bit. That's you're a former judge, and guns is an issue that, like you said, I think earlier you've had about 10 bills you've tried to get forward. What would not just you, but kind of the majority of the Democratic Party like to see on guns? And with the caveat that none of this will move because Republicans are going to be in control. So maybe the better way to put the question is what would you like to see move forward, and what sort of moderating influence would a Democratic the veto power have on gun bills?
Well, I'd like not have this be a party issue. I think it's a common sense issue. What is the public safety? We talk about crime. Well, crime is going up because we have so many guns flooding the society. And we're doing nothing to hold gun owners responsible to safely store their guns. I've been a proponent of these red flag laws where you go to a court, you present evidence, someone's in danger, a judge can temporarily remove a gun to prevent suicide, to prevent a homicide. These aren't political issues, but they're common sense issues. We have to address this. With the rise in the murders and what we're seeing, something has to be done.
And no real support, I don't think, at least in the House Republican caucus, for red flag laws. Y'all have tried to make some incremental moves. Republicans have, Representative saying, on concealed carry to make it so that you do not have to go through so many hoops to concealed carry. Do you see that moving forward, or what do you see moving forward if y'all get a supermajority on guns?
I think it is much kind of status quo as we are today. Representative Hannick, now Senator Hannick, I got to remember that he's moved over to the other chamber. I won't say upper chamber. The other chamber.
Coastal Republican.
The coastal Republican, Bobby Hanning, had the safe storage bill that went through the House. I think there's some places that conversations can happen, but I also know that Republicans are going to be very intentional about protecting what we believe is a fundamental right. And I don't accept the premise that murders and crime is going up just simply because of availability of guns. I think that there's a deeper societal problem going on right now. There seems to be lawlessness across the United States, and you look at the defund the police movement and the attack on just authority in general that's happening. And these things ebb and flow, as we've seen in our nation's history. But I don't know that's necessarily what's going to solve that problem. I think there's some deeper societal problems and some philosophical problems. I think we get through this. I think things change. I think outlooks change. I think part of it's leadership on the national level. I think it's part of certainly the tone and what people see in the media. And I hate it. I hate violence for anybody, whether it's whatever the weapon, right, or if it's just physical violence, whatever that is. But I don't know that we solve it with necessarily more laws. I think it's much to do with the philosophical nature of where we're at as a society.
Yeah, there's only so much you can do about that in a state legislature, though. And I will point out we have more guns in this country than we do have people. So to not see much correlation between the two, I mean, you have to see some, right?
Meaning what? Meaning that people are going to be violent to each other. People have been violent to each other before guns.
Makes it a lot easier when you just have to pull a trigger, though.
Well, how much do you use a gun? If we're talking that, I can be just as lethal at 20 feet with a knife as I can be with a gun. You talk to law enforcement officials who teach concealed carry classes, and I have my concealed carry. That's exactly what they'll tell you, and I've taken it twice just because I wanted to understand it. Once I got it, I took it again because I wanted to be. I'm a safe gun owner. I believe I am. So I took the course twice, and two different teachers said the same exact thing. So I don't, and a lot of times you have people talk about guns who don't use guns. So there's not a lot of familiarity with it. You see, kind of stumbles and inaccuracies about gun handling, gun management, bullets, so forth. I don't know that. Again, I don't know that solves the problem, because if someone has an intent to do something, to do someone harm, they find a way to do it, whether there's a gun available, a knife available, or something else.
Yeah, gun crime has just risen exponentially. We just had a 2-year-old pick up a gun and have a horrible accident. The accessibility, look at public opinion. The vast majority, WRAL ran a public opinion poll. People want stronger gun safety measures.
But do they work? I mean, policy-wise, what are you going to do as a state legislature now that there are 400 million guns in the country?
Well, you have to start. Massachusetts has one of the strictest gun laws on their books, and they have also the less crime.
And it'd be interesting to see, though, because in my district, in Lincoln County, we certainly have high gun ownership. I don't know what that number is, but I would guess it to be pretty high in most households. And we had one murder last year, and that's generally what we average every year. So I don't know that that's necessarily the correlation. There's other factors involved, and so that's where we can have some impact, right? And where how we support law enforcement, how do we look at those type of issues too? So I don't think there's just one answer to that problem.
All right, we're going long. I do want to note, though, it has been several years since I fired a gun. I'd still rather have it than the knife if I'm involved in something. I want to ask about Medicaid expansion, massive issue facing the state. This will be our last one. So the Republicans for close to a decade blocked Medicaid expansion, which would expand taxpayer-paid insurance largely to the working poor in North Carolina. Last year, Republicans started to get on board. Over the last year, the Republicans started to get on board. Now the conflict is between the House and Senate. Different plans. The hospitals don't like the Senate's plan. They will like the hospitals' plan. So this is not a Republican versus Democrat issue anymore, really. But if Republicans get a supermajority, it feels like there's this new question mark. A lot of people think Medicaid expansion is going to get over the finish line in the next 6 months or a year. How does Republicans getting a supermajority change that calculus, Representative Sain?
Well, it goes back to what I said earlier in the conversation. When you look at the Republicans that will help make up that supermajority, we end up into districts that are a little bit more moderated. You'll see candidates that are a little bit more, more likely to vote for Medicaid expansion. So I think that equation is part of that. I think what you saw in this session, the Senate, as typical sometimes the Senate does, is pass not just that one issue, but they tied it to several other issues. And I think it was a short session, and we were intentional on it being a short session. And I don't think I know in our caucus you couldn't get us to a comfortable place in our conversations with the Senate. I think this starts anew with the new legislative body. If we do happen to end up in supermajorities, you've got what I believe will be a few more moderate Republicans, or their view would be more moderated. So it probably is likely to pass, and it would pass on a bipartisan manner through the House, and we'll see what the Senate does. But they've obviously already put down where they're at, and I think we'll end up in the negotiation.
Representative Moore, quickly, more or less likely Medicaid expansion.
It should have happened 12 years ago. I mean, 600,000 people could have benefited, and how many people have died because they have not been able to get the health care coverage they could have had under this expansion? It needs to happen.
And Democrats certainly pushing for it, and now Republicans pushing for it, and yet we just haven't gotten it over the line. It's an interesting topic. We've gone a little longer than I meant to. Thank you, everybody at home, for listening. Thank you to our guests. Really appreciate your time this morning. And thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download, making us part of your morning. Another great way to get WRAL news in the morning is called the Morning Briefing Newsletter. Daily email waits for you every morning in your inbox. Triangle news, events, headlines to get you ready for the day. You can sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Travis. Thank you, Marcia.
Yeah, thanks.
Y'all have a good day.